to keep the Great Lakes on the agenda of policymakers and provides a platform where government, NGOs, academics, and the diaspora can come together to search cooperatively to solutions to the region's conflicts. The forum is presented by some of the leading NGO and academic voices on the Great Lakes in the Washington, D.C. area. Our discussion today will focus on Uganda, as you well know. Rapid population growth and commercial investments are really transforming rural Uganda. Currently, 85% of citizens rely on access to productive land for their livelihood. So today's discussion will look at the changing dynamics of land tenure and access to justice in Uganda. Our discussion features two panelists, Jennifer Ober and Albert Gomez Mugumya of USAID's Supporting Access to Justice, Fostering Equity and Peace program in Uganda. Got it all. The SAFE program. The SAFE program is implemented by the National Center for State Courts and Search for Common Ground in partnership with local non-governmental organizations and community groups throughout Uganda. I would like to welcome our speakers and give a quick introduction to them. Jennifer Ober serves as the Chief of Party for the SAFE program. She's a Democracy and Governance Program Manager with 10 years of experience working with international agencies and non-governmental organizations to strengthen legal systems in transitioning countries. She has served as a Senior Rule of Law Advisor for the USAID mission in Kosovo and a Senior Advisor and Manager with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in Kosovo. She also worked with the U.S. Department of State on programs to address global trafficking in persons, and she holds a JD from the American University Washington College of Law and a BA from the George Washington University, which is also my alma mater. So, yeah. And next to me is Albert Gomez Mugumya. He is the Conflict and Reconciliation Officer for the SAFE program. Prior to joining SAFE, Albert worked as a project coordinator at the Center for Conflict Resolution in Uganda. He was also an FK Research and Exchange Fellow at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation in Johannesburg. He's also worked with the Africa program of Amnesty International and holds a bachelor's degree in political science, history, and philosophy from Makerere University in Uganda and a master's degree in peace and conflict resolution from Lancaster University in the UK. So our format for the discussion today, the two speakers I think are going to go back and forth in a joint presentation for about 25 minutes, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A session. I would like to emphasize that today's discussion is off the record. We want to encourage the speakers and people asking questions to discuss openly. I'd also request that you turn off your cell phones or put them on silent. And we will go ahead and get started. Also, before I forget, I would like to thank very much Search for Common Ground for putting this together today. They've been just an absolute delight to work with, and we're very appreciative of you organizing this event. So with that, I will hand it over to our speakers.
Great. Is this on? Great. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. Albert and I are very excited that we were able to come over from Uganda, where it's about 89 degrees out, to present some information to you about our program and some of the trends that we're seeing in land tenure, but also access to justice issues. I'd also like to thank the Wilson Center and Search for Common Ground for organizing and facilitating this forum. And I'd like to thank the National Center for State Courts and USAID for supporting us to participate today. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the SAFE program, just so that you have some context about why we're talking about these issues today. We'll have a more in-depth discussion about the changing dynamics of land tenure and access to justice issues since the LRA conflict. And then we're going to talk about some of the lessons learned that we're seeing in Uganda that we think might be applicable to other areas in East Africa and beyond. So the SAFE program, which Elizabeth said stands for Supporting Access to Justice, Fostering Equity and Peace, is a 5-year program. It started in 2012. It will go until September 2017. Right after the LRA conflict, USAID and many other donors poured a lot of money into the areas that had been affected by the LRA conflict. And so SAFE is the first of the second generation projects. So we're not doing humanitarian assistance. AID took a critical look at what are the conflict issues post-LRA, what are the access to justice issues post-LRA, and our program is supposed to try to address those. We work in 20 different districts. It doesn't sound like a lot when you consider that there are,
22.
Yes, and sort of increasing every day. There are many districts in Uganda, but USAID picked the 20 that they thought had been most affected by the LRA conflict and were still dealing with the consequences of the conflict. Also areas in the west where oil and other extractives have been discovered, and areas in central Uganda where land conflicts are rampant. Let's see. We're based in Kampala, the capital, but we work primarily in the north and in the west. I also wanted to give you a few statistics to help frame the conversation. These statistics probably will mean more as we go into the discussion. 80% of land in Uganda is customary land. So this means that cultural and traditional leaders determine the boundaries, determine ownership claims, resolve disputes. 80% of the land is communal land, so ownership and use is determined by a community. There is an ongoing debate in Uganda over whether this communal land should be broken up into freehold estates. Some people think yes, because having your own title to property then means, leads to wealth. And there are others who make a pretty convincing argument that if you carve up communal land into freeholds, you are leaving out women and other disadvantaged groups, not to mention people who use the land for their cattle. So that's an ongoing debate that we're experiencing right now. The percentage of land cases in the courts with the backlog, this is not a problem unique to Uganda, but it's a pretty serious issue in Uganda. The SAFE program did a survey we looked at courts, municipal courts, from January 2006 to September 2013. We just looked at 10 courts to give a snapshot of what we thought was a pretty big problem. So just in these 10 courts over a 7-year period, there were 8,896 land cases, and as of 2013, 5,123 were still pending. So there's definitely an access to justice problem. Before we go into sort of the changing dynamics that we're seeing, I wanted Albert to give a brief overview of the LRA conflict. Some of you may be familiar with it, but some of you may not be.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, I want to recognize the presence of Uganda's High Commissioner of the United States, Her Excellency Olive Woneka. Okay. The Lord's Resistance Army conflict has been going on for about 25 years, and as of the last 2 weeks, one of the commanders, Dominic Ongwen, who was a deputy of Joseph Kony, surrendered in the Central African Republic. He is currently at The Hague, and he's been charged at the International Criminal Court. The Lord's Resistance Army War was multifaceted. It had a political dimension, an ethnic dimension. More than 100,000 people lost their lives. Others were maimed and wounded. People were displaced. The family setups were disorganized. I'm happy to say that the conditions are now changing. Northern Uganda is relatively peaceful. The remaining remnants of the Lord's Resistance Army are in South Sudan, parts of DRC, and in Central African Republic. A good number of ex-combatants have surrendered, have been given amnesty, and are being reintegrated into society. It hasn't been easy. It's not easy to join a community that you committed atrocities. Rapes were carried out. So at the moment, a lot of psychosocial support is being given, trauma healing, memorization, and the government has set up a peace recovery development plan to rebuild northern Uganda. Thank you.
Thanks, Albert. One thing I forgot to mention, which is sort of an obvious to understand this presentation, I should have said this earlier. As USAID was doing its assessment of post-LRA Uganda, they looked at what the major conflict drivers were. And by far, the number one conflict driver was land. One of the issues that's putting pressure on land in general is the rapid population growth of Uganda. Right now, there's about 37.5 million people, but the growth rate is 3.2%. This might not mean much until you look at other growth rates. India is projected to grow at about 1.2%, the US 0.7%. These are figures from the World Bank. 70% of the population is under the age of 24, 50% is under the age of 15. So this increase in population is obviously leading to an increase in demand for land, resulting in the creation of smaller chunks of land all over the country. It's often divided between relatives within the same clan, and we're seeing lots of conflicts over inheritance, trespass, land disputes between clans in general. Plus, there are issues over the communal land, where people are grazing their cattle. And this is only going to continue to get worse as the population increases, and there's a further demand on service delivery as well. Along with that is a rapid increase in new districts. I'll let Albert handle that.
Okay, in 1986, when the current president took over power, we had 32 districts. As of today, we have 122 districts. Now, the creation of these districts, as you can see at the back, has created a number of land conflicts, including boundaries and border points, and it has taken an ethnic dimension. So in areas where people live together as one community, the demand for districts has disunited them. The reason given for creation of these districts is service delivery, bringing service delivery closer to the people. But this gerrymandering of districts, of course, is a political issue, especially around election time, where people demand for their own districts. In fact, at one time, one ethnic group had to eat a rat in front of the president to have their area turned into a district, and this was a national scandal, because eating a rodent in our culture is quite unheard of. So there was no alternative but to create that district, which is Tororo. And since that district was created, a number of conflicts have escalated, especially in regards to the border points, to areas that have fertile lands. And this has resulted into killing of people and burning of houses. And this is really a ticking time bomb. And with the 122 districts we have so far, there are about 25 more in the offing. So in a few years' time, I don't know how Uganda will be, but these are the issues we deal with. And you say it's SAFE, our SAFE program, has decided to train, I'll come into details that later, but we are training district leaders in conflict-sensitive leadership. And I can see one of the gentlemen there is one of the people. He's a land expert. We involved him. Nice to see you. I didn't know you're here. In one of the trainings in Karamoja. Really to train people, to train leaders to be conflict sensitive so that their decisions, their actions, their words do not inadvertently cause conflicts. Thank you. Yeah?
Well,
Are you going?
yeah,
Okay, cool. Apart from the creation of districts, we have what we call investors or developers. They're appearing from nowhere. One of the latest crises we have is in northern Uganda in Amuru district. A sugar developer called Madvan, I'm sure some of you have heard about him, is in the process of establishing a sugar factory on 100,000 acres of land. So the inhabitants have to be displaced. They were not consulted. So this has caused tensions People have been killed, clans have been disunited. There are a few people in that community who are for the sugar factory for their own known reasons, but the majority of the people are not interested in that sugar factory. So at the moment, tensions are very high. The surveyors who got to put the border points are beaten up. Communities have moved. And that is just one of many incidents involving investors displacing land. We have what we call conflict monitors in different parts of the country, and they report conflict incidents using a toll-free SMS system, and land conflicts are the most conflict incidents reported upon. If you read the papers every day, it's all about land conflicts, people being killed, houses being burnt, property being damaged, and this is something that was, a few years ago, was not really heard of. And then we've had the discovery of oil in the Albertine region, which is in western Uganda. Well, our map has gone. I hope you don't mind me standing. So this is the Albertine region. Recently, oil was discovered. And you can imagine in an area where oil has been discovered, everybody is rushing in. The original settlers are being displaced. Compensation is being promised, but it's not timely and it's not adequate. So we are seeing lots of conflict incidents in those oil-rich regions. The oil drilling hasn't really begun, but the processes, the building of the factories, the tunnels and everything is causing conflicts. People are now moving out of the area. The rich people are coming to buy because there will be royalties once the drilling begins. As they say, the oil curse. We hoped oil would bring development and employment, but at the moment what we are seeing is the negative bit of it, and the inhabitants are really upset. Some were saying they wished oil had never been discovered in the area, and they see it as a curse. So with good things, bad things come, and that is one of the areas where land conflicts are rampant in the oil. This is an area where land conflicts were not really common, but now they are rampant, displacement is taking place, and there's a lot of insecurity. Even civil society organizations cannot go in easily to do an assessment or to talk to the people because government has given warning to civil society organizations not to hamper, not to hinder, not to block oil development. Thank you.
As peace has returned to the region, there have been conflicts over former landowners reappearing, wanting to take possession of their land. And in the 8 to 10 years since they've been gone, other people have settled on that land. We've mediated several cases where people who had been living in internment camps for the last 8 to 10 years decided to go back to their district and found that their land was occupied by other people or sometimes other family members who didn't want to give them back their land, arguing that they hadn't been there for the last decade. The person on the land had made improvements. We have had many cases with widows who went back to reclaim their land, and now the brother-in-law is saying that it's not their rightful property. So even though it's great that peace has returned and people want to go back to their homes, we're seeing an increase in land disputes because of this. Another interesting aspect to development work, we do a lot of awareness raising of people's rights to make people more aware of their rights and where they can go to demand that those rights are implemented. But it's putting stress on the Ugandan institutions that can't actually meet that demand. So we're seeing an increase in the backlog. When we did our assessment of the courts, we heard complaints that there are just too few judicial officers to handle all the cases coming into the court. People tend to prefer traditional institutions to courts. They're quicker. You can have your case heard in your local language. It doesn't cost any money. But we're even hearing from the traditional institutions that we work with that they used to be able to handle cases in a day or two, and now they're telling people to come back in a few weeks because they have such a backlog. We'll talk a little bit about how SAFE is responding to some of the things that we've just talked about. At the same time as we're sensitizing people and trying to increase what we call a demand for justice, we're also providing training for the traditional leaders and creating partnerships between them so that they can administer customary land tenure both efficiently and transparently. The traditional leaders tend to be predominantly male. They're seen to be very conservative, but you can't discount the role they play. They're incredibly well respected within their community. When they resolve a dispute, it's respected by both sides. It doesn't even need to be written down. People understand that this is what's happened and it's respected. So we actually want to try to strengthen the role that these traditional leaders play by sensitizing them to what the applicable law is, to what human rights norms are. And we're trying to create partnerships between the different institutions, particularly in northern Uganda, so that they can learn from each other, but also try to come up with ways to more effectively deal with the increase in land cases they're getting within their communities. We're also trying to provide alternative dispute resolution training, particularly mediation, because it's a much more efficient, quicker way to get people to sit down and come to an agreement, and it's an alternative to violence. If people know that there's a way they can have their grievances heard and resolved, in theory they shouldn't dissolve into violence. And we have a set of grantees that we work through in the districts who run mobile legal aid clinics, community legal volunteers. We have over 200 community legal volunteers. And these are people who aren't necessarily lawyers. They're just people in their communities who are very well respected, speak the local language, are trusted, and people can go to them with their particular land issue, or other issues come to them as well. And the community legal volunteer can then tell them where to go to get assistance. They can refer them to lawyers that we work with or to a particular institution. The idea behind the community legal volunteers as well is that when SAFE ends in September 2017, these community legal volunteers will still be on the ground. Albert had already mentioned the conflict-sensitive leadership training. We had one training recently up in Moroto, sort of on the border with Kenya up north. There were two sub-counties that had been arbitrarily created, had never had any issues with each other until gold was discovered. And all of a sudden there was a huge issue. So we were able to respond to a request by some of the district leaders, and Albert went up and trained them on conflict-sensitive leadership. And they told us it was the first time anyone had bothered to sit them in the same room and just get them talking about these issues. We also have some lessons learned over the 3 years that we've been implementing the project, things that we think aren't necessarily applicable just to Uganda, but potentially the rest of East Africa, which is also dealing with land conflicts. In terms of development, donors have always demanded sustainability, but now beneficiaries are demanding sustainability. They don't want to invest their time into an activity that they think is going to end as soon as we pick up and leave. Beneficiaries are becoming much more savvier about that. So that was sort of the reason that we're empowering these community legal volunteers, also the conflict monitors that Albert mentioned. We just need to invest in a little bit of training for them, and then they will have this information long after the project ends. It's the same reason that we're training so many people on mediation, because even the courts are now telling litigants to a land conflict, go mediate this before you bring it back to me, because the judges recognize that they just can't work with the backlog. And as I said, we're really trying to involve the traditional leaders in this mediation because they're so respected by the communities. And they really are an alternative to the formal court system, which can't handle all these land cases right now. Do you want to go ahead?
I wanted to give you more information about our conflict monitors. There are 45 conflict monitors per sub-region. We have 4 different sub-regions in Uganda, North, East, South, and the traditional ones. These are volunteers. They do not have to have any qualifications, as long as they're people of integrity and have a mobile phone. We have this unique system where you report conflict incidents using a toll-free system, and we train them on how to use it and what type of conflicts we are looking out for, whether it's verified information and different aspects of it. It's from these conflict monitors that we've now started getting an increase in conflict incidents reported. And we have a unique type of funding, one of the many fundings we have. It's like an urgent action fund. If there's a crisis somewhere, the monitors can report it, and SAFE is able to do a quick conflict emergency assessment. We then identify a community-based organization in the area that we think can manage the tensions and levels of violence, not necessarily to solve the conflict, but to reduce the levels of violence and the simmering tensions. And we've been able to do it in Karamoja, which is in northern Uganda, and in Rukunjiri. And all these have been related to land conflicts. We haven't had any incidents related to, say, political, environment, or ethnic, but it's mainly related to land conflicts. Now, our program will end in 2017, and we believe in sustainability. So we are in negotiation with the Uganda's Ministry of Interior. In Uganda, it's called Internal Affairs. They have a department called Seweru, that's Center for Early Warning and Early Response, and they do something similar on early warning, but in the pastoral regions, and they look at the pastoral conflicts. But we think this is a department that can ably take over so that the system remains sustainable, and we're in the final stages of a negotiation. Thank you.
I think that's it. Is there anything else you want to add?
Maybe just take you back to the land in the post-LR areas. Most of the people, because land ownership is not documented. There are no titles, there are no certificates, but there are wise people or older people who knew the boundaries and since then have died. So we have communities going back. We have people going back into their communities, but the people who knew the boundaries and the border points have since died. So that is causing a conundrum. Number 2, with Uganda law, if somebody has been on your land for more than 10 years, they're entitled, they have squatter rights, they're entitled to stay on that piece of land. So those 2 elements are fueling the land conflicts in northern Uganda. The women-headed households and the youth-headed households are the ones suffering the most because they are not well empowered to fight for their land rights. But that is what SAFE and other organizations are trying to do, to ensure that the women and the youth do not become the victims of these land conflicts. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both very much for such an informative presentation. We're going to now do a kind of discussion Q&A session. I'm going to kick it off with a couple of questions that came up for me, and then I'll take some questions from the audience. The way we're going to do this is I'll take about 3 questions at a time that our speakers can address. I do ask that you keep your questions and comments short. Keep it to about 2 minutes each maximum. That's a bit long even. I might be stricter than that. And make sure that you do ask a question. Okay, so, by the way, we'll have 2 people with microphones who will come and take questions from you. So first, though, to kick it off, Albert, you sort of answered part of my question already. I was going to ask about the settlers that are on the land when the original landowners are coming back. Are they typically squatters, or have they been allocated that land by any kind of authority? And then what do you do with them when you have a dispute like that? I think my first inclination is obviously to be sympathetic to the people who lived there before and were displaced in the conflict. But I can also understand if you've been living on the land for 10 years or 8 years or however long, that you would also feel a legitimate claim to that. So what does a settlement look like in a situation like that?
Sure. That's a good question. It depends, obviously, on the litigants. The one mediation that I described where a woman had returned from the camp and her brother-in-law was now on her land, there had been no formal decision. She was gone. He took over the land. And he, in fact, argued that the land was not hers to begin with. It really should have gone to him after her husband died. We were able to mediate a settlement where she received the land. He had other land, so it wasn't a matter of leaving him landless. We had another case, though, where a woman returned to her land and 3 teenage boys, late, they were 19 years old, were farming her land. And she, during the mediation, the mediators gave her all 4 parcels of her land back. And without any prompting from the mediators, she then turned to the 3 boys and said, why don't we divide this up? I can really only farm 1 parcel of land. Do you want the other 3? No one, forced her to do that. She was just trying to be equitable. And we find that when we facilitate these mediations, people really do try to be equitable. They forgive each other. There's an understanding of why they found themselves in this situation. I was shocked when she gave the land back to the 3 boys, but now they help her take her excess produce to the market. When they have extra, they give it to her. It's really a great success story. So it really depends on the situation.
And maybe just add on, because you asked, are they given the land or they sit on it? In 99% of the cases, this is land that hasn't been occupied, so people come and take advantage. They know the owners are either in the camps, were in the camps, or died, or some people even innocently don't expect people to come back. So it's not that a government or any institution allocates this land. It's just take advantage of available land that's in the vicinity.
Great. Thank you. Okay, let's take some questions from the audience. Please introduce yourself and your affiliation. We'll start here in the front, and then we'll go to the woman there and to the Honorable Ambassador.
Yeah, my name is Julia Clonis. I'm an economist, and I have managed a 2-year project in Uganda funded by European Union. My question has to do with gender issues. Very often, there's a situation where women were the managers of the land, and aid and training was going to men. So women, while they are the managers of the land, did not get the training. Even that picture there shows men taking the training, but not women. What specific measures have you been taking, if any, to address that situation? Thank you.
Thank you.
Someone here in the front.
Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rosemary Segera. I'm a president of a non-profit organization and a profit organization. Thank you so much, Mr. Albert and Obar. Yesterday at the Virunga, Virunga documentary, it was very great. You saw what happened, and this is what we are talking about. And I asked her questions. Why don't the US or other organization involve the local people? I'm very happy Albert, who is a Ugandan, who speaks Kiganda, and when you are speaking to these people, they understand. So this is one thing to show that the world is changing and America is listening to our cry, because if Albert went to those people and started Kiganda, they'll understand him more than any other person. So this is what we were saying. The local people need to be involved. Even those volunteers, Albert, when you are on the ground, don't just let them volunteer. Give them something also. They need to eat too. Part of what you earn, you can give them and let them do better work, because they are the people. Just as I said, the local people give more information to you. And they don't get more credit though they are working, because you are instructing them. So use local people and empower them. Give them something to eat. Give them some tea or drink. It's not a bribe. Just, walking, talking is also work. So I'm very grateful for the work you are doing. Looking at where the conflict is, looking at Virunga, how do you come in and say, now, the conflict is there, the women are there who are the victims, the children are there who are victims. How do you put that as your organization to make sure that these people are heard by the government, the top level, from the president to the ministers, not the project is there, is ending 2017. Okay, leave them to the locals. They may go to the same situation. So you need to make this, that before you leave, the government understands, the local people understand, and everybody knows what you are doing. Not only a story, we are there and it will go, no. So you are training them to be the leaders of these organizations when you leave and to implement what they are doing. So look at that, and when you go back, take those people and empower them and give them something. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we had a question from the Honorable Ambassador.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you for the work you're doing in Uganda. In your presentation so far, you indicate that you are engaging with NGOs and with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. There is a whole ministry of lands.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to hear what engagements you are having with lands, if any successes, frustrations. Thank you.
Great. So I think just to recap, we have a question about gender and training, how to make sure that local people are heard at the top levels, and what kind of engagement there is with the Ministry of Lands.
Sure. I'll take two of the questions. The gender training. Obviously, that's very important. And ideally, every training that we do, we strive to have 50% women, 50% men. And we try to give women in our trainings an opportunity to speak and present, because it is key to empower women. Women listen to other women. Women impact the behavior of men. I'm not sure exactly how many female conflict monitors we have, but in terms of the community legal volunteers that we have, about half of them are women. And typically, when we do mediations, there are more women coming to us than men, and we have more mediators who are women than who are men to try to meet this demand. Women do seem to be a bit more comfortable coming to other women. We're not always successful doing the 50-50, but that's what we're striving towards. Do you know about how many conflict monitors we have who are women?
It's about 40%.
Okay. And I really wanted to address the issue of the Ministry of Lands. They are, on the access to justice side of our work, the Ministry of Lands is our key partner. We inform them of everything that we're doing. We're getting ready to launch something called the Administrative Improvement Plans, where we're working directly with the area land committees and the district land boards in our 20 target districts. Because the Ministry of Lands has the mandate to train the ALCs and the DLBs, we can't move forward without their acceptance. It's been slow going with them, but they have recently agreed to co-brand our land rights handbook to use it as a training material. It's just a very simplified version of all the different training materials the ministry has ever used. We tried to put it into a simpler format so it could be used by civil society to help educate the population. The ministry has told us that they'd actually like to incorporate this into their training because it's just very user-friendly. Instead of being a lecture-based training material, it's more participatory. In addition, they've told us they don't really have the time and money to do as intense a training as we want for the area land committees and the district land boards, but they've agreed to form a joint training unit with us that includes about 8 ministry trainers, 5 trainers from our program, trainers from the district, and trainers from civil society organizations who work on land issues. So there's going to be about 15 of us that go to our 20 target districts and do intense trainings for the area land committees and district land boards. And there's no way we could have done that without the support of the ministry. So if I'm honest, I would say they're a little bit slow, but they have been very supportive of us. And we're hoping that by involving them in all of our activities, again, we'll have sustainability even after SAFE leaves the country.
On the issue of local ownership, thank you very much for that question. Our conflict monitors are good enough story to show the local ownership because they are the people on the ground. We are in the city, but they are on the ground. They are the ones reporting the conflict incidents. They are the ones verifying it. And even when we do that APS grant, it's a local organization that is carrying out the sensitization and the awareness raising. So we believe in a bottom-top approach. In regards to still the Ministry of Lands, during our conflict-sensitive leadership trainings, the district land officials are also part of the people trained. So we have a good working relationship with them.
Okay, we'll take a few more questions. Again, please introduce yourself and keep your questions short. We have the gentleman here, Steve McDonald, and the gentleman back there.
Thank you. Good morning.
It's on. Yeah.
Thank you, Albert and Jennifer. I'm Mwebe Kalibala. I work with the International Accountability Project here in Washington, D.C., and I'm Ugandan. And I've done work with Albert before around the same issue. One, the statistics in the latest Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development statistical abstract of 2010 show that customary land is 68.6%, which shows that there's a significant decrease, which shows that there's a significant decrease in customary land holding in Uganda. This is what it means. It means that there's an increase in freehold because now the people are registering customary land as freehold land. You have talked about the Area Land Committee and the District Land Board. We very well know that many of these institutions are not functioning in most of our districts. But even when they are not functioning, people are going on to get certificates, freehold certificates. So there's a significant problem. We've worked with the Ministry of Lands. Honorable Ambassador, there are very many issues with our ministry, very many. But we'll leave it at that. We have very many issues with our ministry, and we are addressing this same issue, that how can you be having freehold certificates when the Area Land Committee and the District Land Board, which has a hand in this, does not function in most of all the districts. So what it means now with us is that as you do your programming, a lot of conflicts are coming up within communities. Communities are still struggling amongst themselves. People within communities are still struggling amongst themselves. But they are yet to struggle with now the owners of the land that have illegally obtained freehold titles. And that will be a bigger fight. So I don't know how you can look into the issue of now going to the next level of a conflict between a person who owns square miles of land with a freehold title, acquired fraudulently, and now with an entire community that's seated on that land. The second thing, and I'll be fast, the second issue is the traditional leaders. I'm looking to a report or findings around the traditional leadership that would really talk about the effectiveness of traditional leadership in our country around the land issue. You very well know that in northern Uganda, northeastern Uganda, people have been affected by war and the gun. Karamoja has been the gun, northern Uganda has been the war. So many people have been displaced. Now they're coming back to settle. But the traditional leadership, though still legitimate, has been weakened because of now the people who have infiltrated. Now we are having people like Madivani who have come in, people like Oketa, people like all these men, they've come in and they've acquired land. And now they're having the backing of the president. This is not news. the backing of the president because he intervened in all these cases. Now, there is a problem that we are talking about people who acquired freehold titles and who have overrun the authority of the traditional leadership. No traditional leader can stand up against Madivani or Oketa or all these men. So how are we, as you said, Seth, looking at how we are going to talk about strengthening traditional leaders, but also looking at now their position within society? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Steve?
Hi, Steve McDonald, public policy scholar here at the Wilson Center. I spent a number of years in Uganda, starting in 1970, and my question will be informed also by work I've done in Burundi and elsewhere. It builds on the question that was just asked or just posed, because I was going to start talking about traditional leadership as well, and hope that you are working with them. But the question I'm coming to, and we actually got very involved in this as the Woodrow Wilson Center when I was working here. Do you include in your training conflict resolution skills? We found that obviously land issues get very complicated because of the past violence and civil wars and other issues that have beset the societies. And so in the case of Burundi, where we were have been working for a very long time, obviously returning refugees, IDPs within the country, others, some from as far back as 1972. So we're talking about 2 generations removed, coming back to claim land, so an awful lot of conflict around that. And we found that the use of traditional leadership obviously was helpful in that, but also just training of local leaders, both formal and informal, was very helpful. Wondered if you're doing that.
Great. And there was a question. Yes, the gentleman there.
I'm John Richardson. I'm with the Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Law at American University. I have 2 questions for the panel. One is, I was very interested to hear about you talk about mediation as a tool for solving problems. How do you get that to work when you have asymmetrical power relationships between, say, business interests that are drilling exploratory or oil wells, for example, in local communities? How do you get those big interests to come to the table when they may or may not feel that they have to? The second question is, I wonder if you could talk about sort of the follow-on process with regard to the monitors. Once that information is gathered, how is that information then used and implemented to affect some change?
Thank you. So just to recap, we have a question about illegal freehold, the role of traditional leaders and conflict resolution training, mediation between groups with asymmetrical power, and the follow-on with the mediators as well.
Okay. I'll answer the 2 questions on the training and on the conflict monitors. The information we get from the conflict monitors, we write a monthly conflict assessment report. We look at the conflict incidents reported. We have a color-coded system that shows that levels of tension, whether it's high, low, or medium. Once we've done that, we share this report. We give action-oriented policy recommendations. We share the report with different stakeholders, and if need be, we see where we can intervene. Our reports have become popular because we can see from the subscription list and from the feedback we get. On the trainings, yes, we do train on conflict management, resolution, even on conflict analysis before we train on conflict reporting, because this training is not just to report conflicts, but we expect you to be able to go back to your community and maybe train others or use those skills. So that is part of the training. It's normally a 2-day training, and the conflict reporting is on the last day in the afternoon, but the first day and a half is mainly on conflict resolution, management, and analysis. And we give them manuals that they can go back and always refer to.
Something additional about the traditional leaders. Someone had asked, are they weaker due to political interference, which is a good point. But we've had several cases where we've intervened in 2 different disputes, boundary disputes. We first brought the district leadership together to try to get them to talk through their differences. Went away and everything was quiet for a few weeks. And then we received calls saying, the district leaders are fine, but it's the traditional leaders who really need to be trained because they're bringing up issues again. So they still have a great deal of influence. Even if the district political leadership agrees to settle a dispute, if the traditional leaders do not agree, there's no solution. I do think that in certain cases, like with the sugar, they were excluded because the executive had an interest in that. But at the district level, you really can't have any solution over boundary conflicts unless you involve traditional leaders. See, the issue of a customary tenure moving to freehold, it is starting. We're starting to see people carving communal lands into freehold estates, and there's a conflict every time, because there is no consistency in how the title is given or how it's verified. It's something that land equity movement in Uganda is looking at very seriously. What kind of freehold certificate to give to people coming out of customary tenure. But then there's a different group of people who think this shouldn't be happening at all, because when you carve up communal land and turn it into a freehold estate, look at all the people who can no longer benefit from the land. So it's just starting. We're definitely seeing a lot of conflicts over it. I don't know that there's one solution on the table right now, but civil society organizations, in particular land equity movement in Uganda, is trying to come up with a certificate that could be validated to show that there is a freehold estate on communal land. They're working with the district land boards to try to survey the land, but it's really just starting, and we're not sure how it's going to turn out. But you're right that there's conflict every time it happens. Anything you want to add?
I forgot to mention that our engagement with the media, especially in escalating conflicts. We have embarked on training journalists and students of journalism in conflict-sensitive media reporting, because we noticed their reporting was either escalating or exaggerating conflict incidents. So we now have a program where we train journalists from different media houses and from the different universities in conflict media reporting. And especially with the FM station, we've seen there's now a difference in the way things are reported without being biased or without looking at it from one side of the view.
So just to add to that, after our first conflict-sensitive journalism training, the journalists that we trained, who were all established journalists, came back to us and said, it would be really helpful if you could train students in their last year of studies who are just getting ready to come into the field. So we do that now as well. The journalists also started a type of online forum where they could pose questions to each other, or in some cases, someone would draft a story but wasn't quite sure how it was coming across, would send it to the group members and they would comment on it. We're getting ready to do a third conflict-sensitive journalism training specifically around oil and gas issues, how to report on those issues in a responsible way so as not to inflame tensions that already exist in the areas.
Great. We'll take another round of questions. The woman here in the back, and then the two gentlemen along the back there.
Hi, good morning. My name's Amy Johnson. I'm a consultant working in international development. You've alluded a little bit to this with comments about cattle grazing and a little bit about food production, but I'm curious as to whether you've seen any of these cases regarding land rights impacting food security or crop production. Thanks.
Great. Hi, my name is Tony Piescova. I'm with USAID's Land Tenure and Resource Management Office. Wondered if you could speak a little bit more about the role of land administration and community mapping, both from the community level and maybe on the government side, And what, if any, efforts are being done to capture or record the disputes that have been resolved so that those don't become recurring?
Good question.
My name is Mark Brender. I'm the executive director of the Digital Globe Foundation. Digital Globe, the company, owns and operates high-resolution Earth imaging satellites. They're basically mapping machines in orbit that can look down on Earth and see objects on the ground as small as 12 inches in size. So you can easily create a digital smart map of the entire country, which is only the size of the state of Oregon. Are you using any such tools that you can bring down to the local level, actually bring down from space to the local level, and have a documentation on land disputes that then can be codified in a digital smart map that can be managed and run by ministries? So you're all working with the same terms of reference. And the second question is, how does a country like China, who's making big investments elsewhere in Africa, how do they come in and make big infrastructure investment or agricultural investments if they can't know what they're gonna get if the country's so chopped up?
Okay, great. So we had a question about crop production and a few questions about mapping and outside investors like the Chinese.
Sure, I'll take some of the mapping questions because that's something that we've been working on recently with the district land boards and the area land committees. Because we asked them, how are you mapping land? When somebody comes to you and says they have a boundary issue, how do you know who's correct? And they literally were telling us that what everyone in the community knows, but they had nothing written down, nothing plotted, nothing mapped out. So we're giving them like GIS systems, handheld GIS systems, so they can actually go out and start mapping these different boundaries, borders, plots of land. And then the second issue that came up was, that's great, but we don't have anywhere to store the information. Literally, some of the area land committees and district land boards did not have computers or even filing systems. So this created a lot of interpretation issues, ownership issues. And along with that, once a dispute had been heard, or even a mediation, what would stop an aggrieved party from then going to a court and pretending it was the first time this had ever, the issue had ever been raised? Whereas with the traditional leaders, it's all an oral tradition. It's not necessarily written down. We're working with the traditional institutions to actually start writing down the decisions that they're making. The mediations that we hold, everything is written down and signed by the two parties, and we are sending these to the courts so that they're aware of what's going on. We're hoping to expand this a bit and have not a fully sophisticated case management system, but a simpler system where the different institutions involved in resolving land disputes would know what the other institutions had done before them or were currently doing, so that people can't institution shop. Let's see. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll talk about food production. In areas where there are conflicts, food production has gone down. Because one, naturally, you cannot work on that land, and two, the workers who go there are either attacked or butchered. But then we've seen a new trend between pastoralists and cultivators, where you have your acres and acres of, say, maize or sorghum, and some pastoralist comes and destroys in one day your 8 months' work. These incidents, this type of incidents are actually on the increase. I didn't talk about that. And they're resulting into either the recutting of the cows, stabbing of the cows, or the owners of the cattle. So this type of pastoralist stroke cultivator conflicts over land usage are now on the increase.
Okay, great. I think we have time for at least one more round of questions. I'm actually going to jump in with another question of my own. I'm curious if you could talk a bit about the monitoring and evaluation of these programs. Training is obviously a difficult thing to evaluate well, and how do you make sure that people are actually using the knowledge that they're gaining in the trainings? And then we can take a couple questions from the audience as well. Let's see, the woman in the back here, and these two people here.
Thank you very much. My name is Lotte Meinert. I lead a research program on land conflicts in northern Uganda together with Gulu University. I have a couple of questions. One of them is about, I think, Jennifer Ober, you said that people prefer the traditional institutions. Whether you have a breakdown of who prefer which systems and what the outcomes are. I'm thinking gender, generation. The other question is about land issues around the national parks, the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and conflicts with local populations, and whether you have information about the issues with indigenous peoples living in these areas, for example, the Ik people in Karmaja.
Hi, my name is Kate Jo, and I'm from the World Bank. And you mentioned ex-combatants reintegration. I want to know more about like the land problem that ex-combatants met after they went back to their communities. And do you have any like particular solutions for these ex-combatants after they reintegrate back into the community? Thanks.
Hi, Norm Olson from Achievable Solution. We're a small consulting firm. Very good presentation. A couple of questions. One, how many hectares was involved with the woman and the 3 teenagers? I'm just curious as that. Two, what are the major lessons learned that you feel that have come out of your project? It's clear from your presentation, I think you made a very good start, but you're finishing within a couple of years. What do you see as the way forward to further progress? Thank you.
Great. So we've had a lot of issues raised here about lessons learned, which kind of connects to the issue of evaluation, conflicts with indigenous peoples and national parks, reintegration of ex-combatants, and the number of hectares in the case that you talked about with the woman and the teenagers.
Okay. I confess I don't know how many hectares they were talking about. It was always referred to in the mediation as 4 parcels of land. So I can't tell you exactly how many hectares it was. What else did I want to talk about? Oh, the question about who prefers the traditional leaders. I do have a breakdown. I don't have it with me. We completed a baseline assessment and we asked people, when you have a conflict, where do you prefer to go? And the majority of participants preferred to go to the traditional leaders, and the reasons given were it doesn't cost anything, it's quicker, and I can hear it in my local language. Courts are always going to be in English. Courts are costly. I've given you the numbers on the backlog. So I do have those numbers, I just don't have them with me. The M&E question was really interesting. I was at a panel yesterday where someone was critical of donors like DFID or USAID and said, why do they insist on counting the number of sensitization trainings you do? This doesn't tell us anything. And even though I partially understand that frustration, that's really the only way we have to measure what we're doing. You know, there are always questions about what are we measuring? What does success look like? We count the number of trainings we do. We count how many women come to those trainings. We count how many youth come to those trainings. After we do a conflict-sensitive leadership training, it's a little bit of wait and see. Does the conflict flare up again, or have we actually come to an agreement? Was there a signed agreement? With our mediations, there's a signed agreement, but has it been implemented, or has one of the parties taken it to a court? M&E is always very challenging. We're working with the USAID mission in Uganda on this, and we're constantly tweaking our indicators to try to figure out what it is we really want to measure and what success looks like. I think a lot of it at the moment, anecdotal is probably not a good word, but it's a lot of what I just said. After a mediation has been signed, is it actually being implemented? If not, why? And can we address that? With the conflict monitors, we're trying to actually track the number of conflict incidents across the country. Where are the hotspots? What are the issues causing the conflict? And can we do anything to decrease those conflicts? I hope I answered that question a little bit. Do you want to take anything?
On the issue of the minorities, like the Ik and the Batwa, yes, we do get incidents being reported about that. The national parks and the wildlife authorities are supposed to give the communities within the vicinity a certain percentage of their earnings, and are supposed to give them employment or market for their products. Sometimes this doesn't go well, especially with, for example, the Batwa, who used to use the national park for their herbal medicines and for hunting. And this leads a lot of tensions. At the moment, the Batwa are now living in the Kisoro town, majority of them, where they are not welcomed because of their lifestyle. And we see an increase in the number of incidents reported, either they're being attacked or they're attacking, and then they do not get access to facilities, especially in the hospitals. They're discriminated, or even in the schools. Some organizations are trying to build minority-only schools, but at times integration is really needed. In terms of ex-combatants, you must appreciate that majority of them were young by the time they joined the Lord's Resistance Army. And when they come back, they may not even know where their land was, or where they think their land was. They are not accepted. But we try, through our grantees, to hold dialogues between them and the communities they're coming into. But we do not have the powers or the mandate to allocate them land. We don't have that. But at least we try to make sure that they coexist with the communities they're coming to join. In terms of sustainability, as you said, since we're closing in 2017, we want to hand over our system, especially the conflict monitoring database, to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. But our grantees and our beneficiaries are trained and given training for trainers and those skills to carry on, so that once we close, the activities, the projects continue. So we have to bear that in mind, that sustainability issue.
Okay, I think we have time maybe to do two more quick questions. This woman in the back and this gentleman here. But please keep them short because of time.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Gonga. I'm a PhD student at the University of Witwatersrand, but doing my research in Kenya. Now, I want to go back, to two issues that have been raised by people in the audience, and those have to do with, the use of big land. One of them was raised by somebody in the audience, and they were talking about, these big developers. In fact, I think, Albert, you did talk a little bit about it. Madvan, the big people who are coming in and taking, huge chunks of land that is being sanctioned by the state. Do you have any plans? Are you thinking anything about, training people how they are going to manage that conflict? Because I think that is where the big conflict and the big marginalization is going to come from. And then the other consideration is to go back to the gentleman on my left here that is talking about, where countries like China are coming in, and I'm seeing this a lot in Nairobi, really, in Kenya, which is really big time. They're coming in and they are doing large investments in huge tracts of land. Like I saw it on the eastern side of Kenya, where they have come in and they have taken over what was called, the Tana River Development Authority. So for me, I think that is where, the big issues of marginalization and land conflict is going to come from. Big developers like Madvan and big countries like China that are coming in, and they're looking at big stakes, like, land, which is really big time. And especially in countries, like Uganda, where, there's no security of tenure of land has not been addressed. So I would like to know if you are thinking about it, or you have just said, you are going to deal with this small, scale, because people you are training are okay, but I don't know how they can be able, how these monitors can be able, to handle the government.
Thank you. And the final question here in the front.
Yeah, my name is Kefa Makambi from Georgetown University. My question is how the courts in Uganda and the local elders, how the issues of land play out, especially looking at the Ugandan constitution and the land statutes in Uganda, the land statutes. You resolve land issues with the local people. Of course, short term, you can solve that problem. But at the end of the day, do you encourage these people to go for long-term solutions? And if the elders resolve these land issues, is that binding with the Ugandan constitution and the Ugandan courts? Because eventually what's going to work is to have the land surveyed and those local boundaries set. If you don't resolve that, then that becomes a problem in the long term. So it has to be resolved completely and not a short term. Secondly, I think maybe Uganda didn't learn from what was happening in Kenya sometime. I come from Kenya, and around election time, presidents usually like to create districts. So the question is, these boundaries, district boundaries, is that a problem overall in Uganda? I mean, the whole Uganda, or is on the northern side of Uganda? Is the land in the south, close to the capital, surveyed or not? Because boundaries usually come around where the headquarters are going to be. That's what the local people fight for, because you will have smaller towns, small marketplaces, which will eventually be the headquarters of these districts. And people fight, we want to have it this way, we want to have it that way. So how is that issue played out in Uganda, and how is it being resolved? Not necessarily by organizations, but also by the government, because eventually all this has to be resolved by the Ugandan government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have a couple questions about large-scale developers and the Chinese, and then looking at whether the resolutions are binding under the Constitution and whether boundaries are an issue around the capital and in the south as well.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll talk about the districts. Maybe if you take back our map. The district issue is not a northern problem. It's countrywide. It's countrywide. In fact, some districts are not yet operational. As you said, there is nowhere to, there's a contest of where the headquarters should be, where the district starts and where the district ends. So it's a countrywide problem. But there's also another dimension. It's leading to ethnic conflicts, because most of the districts are created on ethnic lines. So this leads to ethnic conflicts and ethnic tensions. In the past, you'd work anywhere in the country, but now to work, say, in a certain district, you have to be from that district. Otherwise, the district service commission that recruits the staff who are of that same ethnic group will not recruit somebody from somewhere else. And that's one of the reasons people are demanding for districts. We want jobs, we want jobs, we want this. So it's a country-wide problem in the north, in the south, in the east. It's not only related to northern Uganda. And what is unfortunate is some districts are only 10 minutes away from the other. So it has led to a drain of the national budget and has led to the increase in conflicts.
Okay, I think we absolutely agree that mediating disputes really doesn't mean anything in the long term unless boundaries can be set. And that is a priority for us, and it's a priority for the government as well. It's one of the reasons we're trying to equip the district land boards and area land committees with GIS, just to start setting the boundaries within their districts and their sub-counties. We have found as well that when the elders come to a decision, it is respected by the courts. But we're trying to get those agreements in writing. It's always been oral, and then it's people just saying what the agreement was. We're trying to get it in writing, which is something a bit new, and not everybody is completely comfortable with that. but it's hard to keep track of these mediations and these agreements if they're not in writing. In terms of the developers coming in, the Chinese, but also the French and the English, there's definitely a recognition on our part that the communities are already being marginalized. The government has made agreements with the oil companies that the communities were never even involved in. So we're about to start a series of what we're calling public-private roundtables, particularly in the areas in the West where oil has been discovered. And the idea is to bring communities together, to give them a chance to air their concerns, and also use it as a forum to educate the communities on what their rights actually are and where they can go to have these rights realized. The oil companies, maybe not surprisingly, have been very supportive of this. We're aware that they may have ulterior motives, but each of the oil companies has what they're calling community liaison officers, and they've been incredibly supportive and eager to participate in our public-private roundtables. They feel they're being maligned in the media by the press, and if they can go and talk to the community, they can work something out. We haven't done any of these roundtables yet. They're happening next month, but we're hoping we can at least start a dialogue. Do you want to add anything?
I think one of the biggest challenges with the big investors is being labeled saboteur, anti-development, sabotaging government programs. So at times people trade carefully in order not to be misunderstood. But where need be, we are going into for that engagement with different organizations, different companies, and we also hope to train these very companies in conflict sensitivity so that they know that what they are doing could inadvertently or advertently cause conflict. So we believe in that engagement. But for example, in the oil region, you just don't wake up and say, oh, I'm going to do this in the Albertine region because government wants to know what you're exactly going to do and why. And some people don't really understand the concepts of conflict sensitivity. They said, what is that? What is the relationship between conflict and development? So it's a work in progress. Yeah.
Okay. Would either of you like to make any kind of closing remarks or anything to wrap up?
I just want to thank everyone for attending, and particularly for the comments we received from people who very much know the situation in Uganda and had some thought-provoking comments and questions for us that really need to be further considered, and we could probably speak for another hour or two just on the issue of customary tenure moving into freehold. So thank you very much for attending, and thank you for your thoughtful questions.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much for coming. Again, thank you to Search for Common Ground for all your work in putting this together. To continue the conversation and pose further questions on Twitter, you can use the hashtag GLPF, Great Lakes Policy Forum, and you can also follow Search for Common Ground at SFCG_, and you can follow the Wilson Center Africa program at Africa Up Close. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you.